Welcome to the SEMC August virtual program, Managing Real-World Collections in a Virtual Hybrid World. My name is Zinnia Willits, and I am the Executive Director of the Southeastern Museums Conference. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a light-skinned white female with shoulder-length reddish-brown hair, which is straight today despite the high humidity down here in Atlanta. I'm wearing black-rimmed glasses that are often referred to as cat-eye style, and today I am wearing a blue plaid short-sleeve dress that I like to say has a very 1950s housewife look to it. I am in the Atlanta office, but I have a virtual backdrop of the SEMC logo on a desktop computer screen. A warm welcome to all of our members joining us today, as well as those who may be new to SEMC. SEMC is a regional professional organization representing museums and museum staff in the 12 southeastern states, as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have a membership of around 1,500 and continue to grow. I'm pleased to continue our 2021 virtual program series with this talk focused on managing collections and collections care activities in a virtual environment. As you might know, any topic related to collections management is a favorite of mine after spending 17 years working with the spectacular art collections at the Gibbs Museum of Art in Charleston, South Carolina. No matter what my title is, I will always be a registrar at heart. Before we begin, a huge thank you to the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation for the significant support they have provided to SEMC over this past year to make these programs possible and allow us to keep them free for our members to attend. Also, thank you to Aaron Banks of Banks Creative in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, the talent behind our SEMC promotional graphics and branded look. As always, just a few housekeeping notes before I introduce our speakers. The session is being recorded and will be available on the SEMC YouTube channel by the end of the week. Closed captioning is available for today's program. You can turn it on via the CC button at the bottom of your screen and make sure to enable the auto transcription feature. A written transcript of today's session will also be available just as soon as we can get it edited. I'm certain there will be many questions for our speakers, and I encourage you to put them in the Q&A box so that we can keep track and address them at the end of the program. While this is a Zoom webinar and your cameras are off, you are still here, and I encourage you to speak freely and engage with your colleagues in the chat, which will not be captured in the recording. As I have said before, while the C in SEMC stands for conference, it also stands for community, and it's so nice to have all of you here today. Along those lines, just a quick note that SEMC is moving forward with our 2021 annual meeting in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Please visit our website to learn more about this event, as well as the COVID protocols we will have in place for the safety of all attendees. This year's annual meeting is a hybrid event, and we will also be offering a full program of virtual sessions like this one, as well as live streams of several on-site sessions at the Chattanooga Convention Center. However you choose to attend this year, our program and events teams are working very hard to provide a quality professional experience filled with networking, support, and camaraderie, the very hallmarks of SEMC. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. First, we have Mary Hauser, the Registrar and Associate Director at the Gregg Museum of Art and Design at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. Next, please welcome Elise LeCompte, Registrar and Coordinator for Museum Health and Safety at the Florida Museum of Natural History in Gainesville, Florida. And rounding out the panel is Ainsley Powell, the Curator of Collections for the City of Raleigh's Historic Resources and Museum Program, also in Raleigh, North Carolina. You can learn more about our presenters from their full bios, which I will post in the chat shortly. I'm so thankful to all of you for the time you have devoted to this topic and for sharing your vast experience with managing collections in all types of environments. Now I am pleased to turn the floor over to our speakers.
And I have to interrupt for a minute. Okay, I couldn't get my video on earlier.
Okay, you're back. Thanks, Elise.
Okay. All right.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Zinnia. We're really glad to be here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start our presentation. So yes, we are here to talk to you today about managing real things in a not so real world, though in reality, that's where we find ourselves. As Zinnia mentioned, I'm here with two other fantastic colleagues, and we specifically are assembled to talk to you from our different perspectives. We come from different types of museum with different sizes and kinds of collections. We're under different governance and auspices, and we have different levels of expertise in the field. So we hope that you will find something that applies to your institution that you will learn from today and be able to take back and implement. Our goal today is to give you some examples and strategies and opportunities for managing your own collections or the collections you may face in the future in this world that we find is going to be ever changed. There is no back to normal, there is only new normal. Perhaps you feel like my toy dinosaurs here in the picture navigating this new digital safari, wandering across a keyboard to an unknown land. That's Mutt and Jeff, but for the record. So we'll walk through this in 3 phases. We'll go through some collections, ideas, exhibitions, thoughts, and then some programming. Before we start with that though, let's do a quick poll. Zinnia, could you put that up for us? The question you'll be addressing is, were you able to address any backlog projects during the pandemic? And if so, what? We've given you some categories and some other, a field for other if you would like to submit something else. We'll leave that up and Zinnia will let us know when we have sort of a critical mass of responses, and then we'll look at what that says. While we're doing that, if you have any notes, if anything's going wrong or you can't hear, speak up, let us know now.
Just giving people a minute here to finish logging in. We've got about 60% have participated. And still getting a few more. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share the results. You guys seeing that?
Yes, looks like database entry, update, and cleanup is the leader. That was definitely what we found. You know, keeping all of our collections folks on staff was a wonderful thing during that time, but it was an opportunity like no other to be able to focus on that sort of back of house stuff. Ainsley or Elise, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, that's exactly what we did too.
Yeah, it's definitely a swath of a little bit of everything, but yeah, the database from home was something I did a lot of.
Thanks for your help with that poll, Zinnia. And I'm going to turn it over to Ainsley, who will take us into collections world.
Okay, so I'm gonna go through the collections variety of topics, and the first thing that I ran into when we went to specifically a virtual world was collections committees. In fact, I had a collections committee scheduled the week after COVID began. So obviously that was put on hold, and then, you know, various things had to happen at the upper government level, and we were given clearance to do virtual committee meetings. And in my case, it happened to be Zoom meetings. So the way I worked around this virtual world is I scanned a lot of materials, gave a good swath of each donation for the committee to consider. Obviously, I had a lot of things in front of me for extra questions, donor related things. And I did 3 Zooms, and they were all equally successful as they would have been in person, but it was definitely a very quick shift in that regard. Mary?
We did Zoom collections committee meetings as well. And part of our CMP is that it requires the collections committee or at least one representative to see objects in person before voting. So we sort of did a hybrid. We pulled all the objects and prepared the information and set them out, and then scheduled individual times for committee members to come and view them and kind of talk through them. And this had the benefit of forcing our members to spend time on considering the pieces in advance. So that was a benefit. And then also during the meetings, we found that the meetings flowed better. We voted on all of the objects or groups of objects by polls. And we have some strong personalities and some quieter personalities. And doing it via polls and via Zoom really leveled the playing field for those. And we found that people were answering more honestly and feeling less coerced is maybe a strong word, but less pulled in one direction through that format. So we've actually had collections committee meetings via Zoom while every one of the members is here at the museum in the building because we like it better.
So the next collections related topic that we wanted to cover was research and class visits. In my case, I deal with a fair amount of outside researchers for various projects, and the way I did not want them to come on site because many of our buildings are very small. And obviously, we had body count limits during COVID. I worked around it by asking very specific questions and what they needed from me or what they wanted to know of the collection. And I either found it on our database and put it onto our online collection, which is the lower left picture, if it was not on already. And if it was not processed completely, I did go back to specifically that collection. And in one case, it was a very large Red Cross mixture of objects and clothing and scrapbooks. And we went back and processed it a little bit more fully so he could get the information he needed. Or I did Google Drive. If it was very image heavy. I did view only, and that was rather successful. If the online catalog was not an option for whatever reason. And so far, no complaints, and it worked rather well. We are back to in-person researchers though.
Our main class of researchers, being that we're a part of university, are students in classes and professors asking for access. We have a class that looks at the history of textiles around the world, and they meet usually in our collection space once a week in spring semesters. So spring of 2020, we had been meeting in person in our collection space and then suddenly had to shift. So we had 2 weeks to figure out a new plan. We couldn't cancel the class, we couldn't change the class, and we couldn't have anybody, including myself, on site that first week. So we pulled images from our database and put them into Google Drive. I did a screen share. So what you're seeing in the lower right is the class looking at an object. And we found that when we had high quality images, that was good because I could zoom in on my screen and direct where the students were looking and show some of those things. But we're limited by the images we have. So if we don't have a good image, you can't see it well. And if we don't have an image of an aspect, we can't see it at all. We also had a few other classes later when I was able to go into the building, request objects, and I could pull those objects and show them. So the upper image, I'm using a document camera to show those pieces. We found that that was somewhat successful. The lighting on those is a little different, a little harder to control. We could have done a more extensive setup, but that was what we had. But one professor of archaeology really liked that setup. She has visited our collection before. Her class sizes are usually 30 to 40 students. And she had to go through a very complex setup to split up her class and even ask students to come outside of class time. And then they would come and look at these very small items on a screen and or on a table and barely be able to see them. With the screen share, with the document camera, we could zoom in, we could show details in a way that we've never been able to. And she actually prefers it. So she has said for future visits, she will do Zoom instead of in person.
I taught a collections management course in the last fall, And that course usually includes in-person visits to various museums around the region. So I had, of course, to teach it virtually. So I used a lot of webinar presentations, more images than I normally use in my lectures, and other resources in place of the in-person visit. I especially used more case studies, but for the case studies, I created PowerPoints with lots of photos of the object or objects that were talked about in the case studies. In terms of research, we had to close our buildings to any research in 2020. The students started coming back this year, and we have had a few researchers come, but due to university imposed COVID restrictions and restrictions we would follow anyway, I, for this fall, had to tell a professor no, that he could not bring his students in to study objects because they're in a room that has very limited space and there are 2 people in there on a permanent basis. So.
So something else that I encountered very early on during our virtual and hybrid world was working with my volunteers. I have some very dedicated long-term volunteers for several years now, and they expressed an interest in still doing work from home if they were able. And of course, I jumped on that train because I always want to keep them interested. And I was able to go about it in 2 different ways. Again, Google Drive was really successful, which was the right-hand 2 pictures. In this case, it was a late 19th century magazine, and I just wanted her to give me better descriptions. Which you can see what is his current description and what a more complete description to the right. She vastly improved on that. In another case, I had still have a gentleman working through an 1850s recipe book where he's just transcribing, and I send him a lump sum of PDFs, and he will come back with the Word document all typed up with what he can read. And so far, it's been rather successful, and it has been a nice in-run for in-person work.
Like Ainsley, we have quite a few volunteers here that are long-term volunteers. Here you see Janet Cornelius. She is a retiree who worked for us for over 10 years. And she had before COVID, had worked on many projects that were highly confidential and sensitive. So she became a highly trusted member of our staff. Even though she was a volunteer, we considered her staff. And I had been trying for 3 or 4 years to get the database of our photographic images up to date and complete. And so I made the decision to allow the photographs, slides, and negatives to go out of the building to Janet's home. One of the reasons I did this is I've known Janet personally for over 25 years. I knew that her house was clean, pest-free, orderly, and that the temperature and the humidity in her house were fairly well maintained. And she also had a home office in which she could work. We used university email and Dropbox, so I knew that these software programs were highly secure, and Janet logged into the UF system from home, and so I felt very comfortable about the security of the program. And we did communicate via email and use Dropbox and to transfer files back and forth.
So one thing that was always on my mind early on during COVID and obviously still is in this hybrid world, is just general care and monitoring of our spaces, exhibits, storage, etc. And initially, I was not even allowed to go onto our campuses, our properties. It was site managers only, and they could only go for every 3 days to go check their places, you know, everything's in working order, and they had to leave. It was very locked down. And so I gave the general rundown of how to empty dehumidifiers, how to look for bugs, which you can see Anna doing there on the left. I really relied on those folks. And, you know, it was the, you know, high summer, and, you know, these dehumidifiers get full every single day. So they were not getting emptied as I would have liked them to, but it was the best we can do. That's kind of the name of the game when it comes to collections environments. And the same goes for bugs. Rallying and getting buy-in from my coworkers was really, really important.
So in my situation, I was the site manager, so I was able to go into the building, but only for 4 hours once a week. In between then, I was able to watch our building on camera. So we have a 4-year-old building, and we really benefit from the technology we were able to put in at that time. So I discovered a loaned object that had slipped in its mount using our cameras. I could monitor our front door, so I could see when the delivery people were, you know, knocking and trying to get in, and figure out how to coordinate with that to try and meet them. Actually lived close enough. One time I ran over to meet them, you know, and caught the truck right as he was leaving. No. But that technology was really helpful. And I have to say it became a little addictive. It's kind of like reality TV.
In my case, at the university, I'm lucky because for the museum, I'm considered one of the museum's essential personnel. And for the university system, I'm a building emergency coordinator. So I was actually allowed to be in the building every day. And most days, at least on my floor, I was the only person here. And we have an offsite facility as well, where I had to monitor and empty the dehumidifiers. Just like Ainsley did. And again, they had to be emptied every day. We're in a very tropical environment here in Gainesville with lots of rain, at least last year and this year. Another thing that we had to do, as we have to do often here, is prepare for tropical storms and hurricanes. You can see a lot of the plastic here. And so only the essential personnel were allowed to come in and do the draping and prepare the building for the storms. That work, we have a number of essential personnel for every floor here at the Research and Collections building, and also for our exhibits building. One of the problems that I had at the offsite facility, we had mold growth, and we had to put the mitigation on hold for a number of reasons. One was because of the lack of available supplies. There were no disposable hazmat suits available, no masks. A lot of the supplies that I needed to do the mitigation were not available. I'm actually still waiting on a HEPA vacuum cleaner that I ordered in April, and they now tell me it will be available in September. And also the COVID restrictions on entering museum buildings, again, until almost the fall of last year, only essential personnel were allowed to enter and be in the museum building. So again, the offsite facility was my responsibility. And the post-storm checks too, again, that was my job, and the other at our Research and Collections building and our public building, the other essential personnel to do the checking.
So something else that we have had to definitely pivot in this hybrid world was paperwork. Us collections folks love paperwork. And one thing that I definitely had to do and work with donors on was texting pictures of their potential donations. Usually in a normal world, pre-COVID BC, as I tend to call it, they would come by the museum, we'd set up a meeting, show and tell, etc. But for a long while, it was text me your options, send me your pictures by options. Thankfully, I have a work cell, so I could keep it very church and state. Or they would drop off a box of things for us to consider, and then we would get back to them with our yeses, maybes, and nos, and kind of go from there.
One of the things that I use, I have a JPEG image of my signature, and I'm sorry the red line got moved a little bit when the translation from one into this presentation. I had started using this before COVID, and so I can put my signature in. Some of the donors, when we do the deed of gift, I give them instructions on how to do it, do a JPEG of their signature, or we ask them to print out the deed of gift or the paperwork, sign it and scan it. Many home printers these days have a scan feature. And if they couldn't do that, we use the old-fashioned method. They would sign the form and send it back via mail. So we used a number of different options.
We were thankful for being a part of a larger institution where we're not allowed to sign some things and it has to go through a university signatory, but they started a digital process 2 to 3 years ago. And we used to get physical signatures and then just upload to that system. But a part of it is a DocuSign license. So we could then work the other way, put the forms into the system and then email those to our donors and lenders. When COVID hit, we had an exhibition with 22 different lenders, most local, very few tech savvy. So that was a big learning curve for them. And we did end up doing some of the just physical print mail, and I would scan it on one of my weekly visits to the museum. But I also became very adept at the Genius Scan app, which I have to say can really work magic on some poor quality cell phone snapshots. So I highly recommend it. And I think I was able to add in a circle there for your name, Elise, so hopefully that's visible.
Okay, so we're gonna throw out a second poll. Zinni, if you don't mind throwing that up on the screen. Have you accepted any donations to your collection over the past year? As everyone knows, people have been, at least in my case, cleaning out their houses, and there's been an uptick in donations. So I have definitely had an influx in the last about year and a half.
We had a lull for a little bit, but I have to say the past 4 months, whoo, golly.
Okay, I'll just give it another 30 seconds.
We've also experienced that as well.
Still coming in. Okay. There you go.
About half and half, okay. You know, it's kind of subject to your institution, I think. Great.
Thanks for that, Zinnia. I'll take us into exhibitions land. Thank you, Ainsley, for collections land. So I don't know about you, but COVID sure threw a wrench in my calendar, personal and work, especially exhibitions. You know, the not being able to have people in our buildings or changing how that happened really had an impact. Ainsley, could you share a little bit about how that impacted y'all?
Yeah, so we were in the throes of planning and designing and writing our 19th Amendment exhibit. We were slated to open it last September, I believe, during the centennial time for the amendment passing in 2020. And the picture to the left, it is just a few of the updates to our exhibit calendar that we had. I'm always kind of by default the scribe for our exhibit cohort, and so I keep a lot of the notes, and I tended to update all the various things that kept getting pushed back and pushed back. The exhibit did open in November, but it was a bit of a headache because everything shifts, the big stuff and the small stuff, and it's a little annoying.
We had some major shifts too. We had 4 exhibits up at the time. 3 of them had been organized in-house. 2 were loans. 1 was from our collection. And then we had another loan, fully loaned, like show in a box kind of exhibition. And all of them ended up having different factors to what we did with them. But I've shared a picture of our calendar on the right. Just that's after one meeting of, okay, well, if we move this over here, that's going to change this. Well, and that means we have to extend this, and we can't do it real time. So I'm just scribbling. I'm a very visual thinker, so I had to think of it that way. But, one little thing can change everything. And that was really highlighted by an exhibit that had just closed before our university shut down. So I was pushing really hard. I'm like, we have 4 days. If we can get as many of these pieces shipped out using the plan that we had, let's pack, get them out. And one of the people on our team was just delaying. And those 2 days of delayed work when we didn't get anything done meant 3 months of delay getting the pieces back. That just snowballed really quickly. Sorry about that. I skipped a couple slides. Go back. Oh. So sometimes you just want to tear up the paper and, start again, which is really kind of what we did. So in that time when we couldn't have people coming into the building, or maybe there were limitations, we had to figure out different ways to do exhibition. For us at the Gregg, we were lucky enough to have taken 360 images of many of our recent exhibitions. We had done those mostly for archival purposes, but we were able to implement them and get them up and running really quickly. So the picture on the left here is an image that is taken using a program called Matterport. You may have seen it if you've looked for apartments recently. That's one of the ways you can tour through spaces. It's really great. So people hop through the image, from circle to circle. And then we have these little icons that if you click on it, will open up a bubble. So we could put all of our exhibition text into it, including credit lines and everything. So it's just like putting up an exhibit, and people have more control over what's going on so they can walk themselves through. It's still a bit of a technology hurdle, but it helped a lot. We also had guided tours of that. So when people had some of those tech hurdles, our education staff did scheduled walkthroughs. So they would take people through those things and talk about them and highlight specific objects. So it was almost like a real tour through an exhibition. And we got people from all over the world. We have some folks from England and Japan who now come to every single one of our virtual tours. So who knew? Doing that though, doing that meant we had to think about what it meant to capture things digitally and what it meant to reuse those images. So Ainsley, tell us a little bit about that from your perspective.
Yeah, so we ended up, similar to Mary, doing some digital exhibits, transforming the stuff on the wall into a fancy slideshow, if you will, and via Prezi, I believe, and or Google Earth, I should say. And in turn, I had to get some permissions for things that I did not have previously. For example, for our Google Earth tour for Pullen Park, one of the stops that you can do is there is a tree on the island in the middle of the lake, and it is a what we call a half moon tree. went up to the moon in the 70s and came back with the seeds that were then planted anyway. So anyway, I had to reach out to NASA to get permission to use a picture as a graphic for the Google Earth tour. Something that was very unexpected. Similarly, I did a lot of editing content for our Mordecai Historic Park tours, where the the education staff would write up the content, have the pictures, and I would go back and add a little bit of a collection spin to things, or cut it for clarity or whatnot, and in turn ensure we had all the right permissions, because in the case of Mordecai, this collection is primarily on loan. It is only managed by the city.
We had that same question about permissions and rights to use things, and a lot of our image uses and exhibitions were loan-based or based on exhibition loans from artists. So in our documents, we were focused on like what happens during the run of the show rather than what about archival images. So this has led us to actually modify our paperwork so that we ask for permission to use these later on too in exhibition specific circumstances, virtual walkthroughs later. And we're being more proactive about having those conversations before the agreements rather than having to go back afterwards and one by one get them. Right. So then we have to figure out how to install and deinstall these shows. Elise, can you tell us a little bit about condition reporting and what you faced at your institution?
Sure. In terms of the install, we actually had to, when the museum opened in July 2020, we had to work before the opening hours and after the opening hours. So we had to take all the objects out of this case for an AGPRA issue. And we did that before the museum opened, the public museum. And we did it with limited staff. It was just myself and one of the collections managers. And so it was just the two of us taking things out, wrapping them and moving them to the secure room, and then packing and bringing them back to our research and collections building. In terms of condition reports, you see on the right a dugout canoe. This is on loan from our museum to a museum in Alabama. And they had decided that they want to build a cradle for it, or a better way of displaying it, not on the floor anymore. And so we did two things. We, via Zoom meeting and telephone calls, consulted on the construction of the cradle and discussing other methods of display. And then for the virtual condition report was myself and the collections manager on this end, and the two of the staff of the museum there in Alabama on that end. And those staff, they use their iPhone video feature. My colleague guided that museum staff as they went down the length of the canoe, top, bottom, sides, and she dictated the condition report out loud, and I typed it as she dictated. And that was, we decided that for a couple of reasons. One, the motion sickness issue that I have, I didn't want to view the video of a live video, and I'm a better typist, faster typist than her. So I pulled up our condition report form on the computer and just typed away. And then of course, I did have to edit it when we were finished, but it was a very efficient, productive method.
For me and my crew, we were unfortunately afflicted with quite unexpected mold problem in one of our outbuildings here at Mordecai Historic Park. And so we did a lot of solo work regarding condition reporting. Thankfully, at the time, our classroom and our visitor center was available and open and not in use. So it was either, two people take a corner or one person at a time, and, or one person goes upstairs. and we just conquered it that way. For the larger pieces, we suited up appropriately and kept the doors open and, all the safety precautions. And we did not do anything digital, but it seemed to work well for us regardless.
We did a bit of that staff staggering too, and I've just included a picture here of the importance of communication in that when you can't be in the same room at the same time, leaving as clear instructions as possible is really helpful. So yes, this thing goes on here, not the other way around, just like that. All right, I see that we're running a little bit short on time, so I'm just going to skip over this one more thing. In terms of safety for our visitors, I know that Ainsley, both you and I, our institutions did some staggered or timed entries. For us, we found that Evite signups, that was how we chose to manage it, but people just really weren't interested. They didn't want to plan that far. They didn't want to feel that restricted in doing it. And as soon as we lifted that requirement of signing up for your visit, we saw an uptick in visitorship. So probably not something we'll try again unless we really have to. Ainsley, anything to add for yours?
Not really. Ours was really, the offerings were scant. It was really conditioned onto the contributions to specific exhibits, families. It did not go out to the general public, and we didn't get a lot of response or interest because they didn't want to come in for COVID reasons. But we still wanted to give them the option.
All right, so that leads us to another poll question. Did you try something new this year regarding exhibitions or programs? Zinni, can you pop that up for us?
Yeah, I feel like I need to be on screen when we're doing the polls.
We like to see you here too. Welcome to this.
I'm just like this voice in the background. Okay, launching. I know I tried a lot of new things this year for SEMC. Oh, what a year.
I feel like we were forced to do new things. This is sort of a question of, did you actively choose to do something new?
Yes.
That would be a different question for me. Most of it was just keeping my head above water, I confess.
All of us, I think, Mary. So still, responses still coming in.
And just a note on timing, we do want to make sure there's time for questions. We do still have a programming sections. We are going to go through that, but Zinni, I think you mentioned that logistically we can go a little bit after 3 if we need to. So we'll just make sure we cover the topic and then leave a little space for questions too.
Sounds great. All right, I'm going to end the poll, share the results.
That's good. If you tried something new, it mostly was successful. That's good to hear. Thanks so much for that.
Yep.
Elise, take it away with programming when you're ready.
I am ready. So I'm going to go over some of the programming issues. Many of the programs that we do involve collections in some way or another, and we did have to adjust the programs. We could move to the next slide. So one of the things that the Florida Museum does and has done for a number of years was a junior volunteer program. These are for kids that are ages 12 to 17. Pre-COVID, of course, these volunteers worked as in person as docents and museum summer camp counselors. Post-COVID or post-closing, the program coordinators decided to design a program that would teach the junior volunteers about museums, a mini museum studies program, and about our collections. So, for example, I did a lecture on museum ethics, and I was very pleasantly surprised at their level of interest and their questions and comments, many of which were actually better than my graduate students asked. Ainsley or Mary, anything to add?
I did a few presentations connected to our summer camps. We have a healthy summer camp program here in Raleigh, and it was physically based at one of our parks this summer. I usually do some type of presentation, but this year, instead of me showing them something in one of our houses, I showed them something online via our online catalog and explained kind of like how I do what I do and how I manage the collection and how I research our collection. And just a few pictures was rather illustrative, and similar to Elise, I had some very insightful questions from like 12-year-olds. So, they can be rather surprising.
I think y'all covered that. I'll leave it to you too.
Okay. I noticed one of the things that Mary did and what we've done now too is use our student interns to create virtual programs as well. Next slide. Another program, well, this is donor relations, and I'll let Mary and Ainsley talk about that.
So something that I realized very quickly due to our fact that our buildings are so small and meeting donors is a way of life for us collections folks. And thankfully, in the case of Mordecai here, I do have the benefits of a circle driveway. So you can see the picture on the right. They are able to pull up right to the front door, and I can, hand them something through their car window and vice versa. At our other sites, it's just pull up onto the curb or by the curb, and I can come out to you with a cart or whatnot. And that always works very well. The hard part is, finding the time to meet with them, and that works for them. I try to make it myself available as possible, but when I am only on site 3 days a week, I generally work Mondays and Fridays at home. By default, that gives them a 3-day window to work around. There are some logistics in that regard.
We, not specifically donors, but with lenders, we had to return a bunch of objects. Thankfully, they were all small. So we set up a sort of system where we could bring those to people's cars, and we had a nice little place for them to pull into, and, drew a little map of where specifically to park so we could find them, and just put together a whole system of, pens, cleaning. And we found that it was important to show people what we were doing to keep them safe, a little bit of that cleaning theater. But then a wrench was thrown into it when the person who was supposed to be doing all of that, me, tested positive for COVID in a fluke. So we had to then just suddenly shift it. But it just highlights that need for communication. And, I had it all sort of written out to explain to the lenders so I could quickly shift that to my coworker and say, okay, here's the plan. If you're not comfortable, switch it in any way, but just execute as you can.
Next slide. Mary, I'll let you talk about this.
Like we mentioned with doing those backlog projects, we also had to just kind of quick pivot. If we're not going to be putting up exhibitions for the next 8 months, what do we do with our exhibitions staff? So, in fulfilling the mission of the museum, if people are not coming in to visit a physical exhibition, we're still serving our public. So how do we do that? And we quickly determined that our current photographs were subpar. So we were able to take the time when our galleries weren't accessible to the public to use them as a photography studio. So this is our art handler taking a picture of a large object that, quite frankly, we would not be able to photograph in any other circumstance. So it's a great opportunity.
Next slide, please. This is a couple examples of audience engagement. How do we switch programs that were in person to virtual? For years, every summer, the Florida Museum did a program called the Creative B Film Program, showing an in-person B-rated film with a panel of museum and film experts. For example, one of the first ones that I did was Anaconda. And I took objects from the indigenous Amazon collection and talked about the culture, the objects, and the illicit trade and looting of endangered species and their parts. Post-pandemic, the program was turned into video tours of the collections. Each week featured a different collection one night, followed by a trivia quiz a couple of nights later. and these are still available online. Ainsley.
One of my big engagement activities during COVID, and it still continues in our hybrid world, is just getting more information, collections materials onto our online database. I was about 14,500 objects last year in late spring, and I just rolled over to 18,000 online. The more content that's searchable by our public, you know, there's a bit of a trickle down effect in various capacities. So that was a very large initiative and something I was able to do from home and in the office.
Thanks. Next slide. And Mary, I'll let you talk about this.
We also upgraded our online database. That was something that the database administrators had been asking us to do, but we took that as an opportunity. And then almost in conjunction with it, we did a lot of behind the scenes accesses via video. Those are all recorded and shared on YouTube, and we can access them later on. You know, if we have an exhibition where something is highlighted in a previous tour, we can reshare those. So it gives us a lot of content. I will say that we learned a lot in doing it. When I was the only person coming into the building, I was filming myself and dealing with whatever equipment we had at the time when you couldn't order any of that. So you can see me evolve as an on-screen personality. I still have lots to learn. But we also use that as a member perk. So we would release some of them to members early. And that behind the scenes access was a way to help people keep engaged and understand what we were doing while they couldn't come to our exhibition spaces too.
Next slide. And I'll let Mary and Ainsley, you can talk about what you did for social media.
There was a big uptick in social media as well. We actually polled our whole staff to say, you know, how can you in your role keep the public engaged in the museum? For some people, they could write text or they could write a social media post. For other people, it was that they could review that or help brainstorm ideas or help think through how to make sure we were presenting diverse stories and make sure that we were keeping those posts accessible and interesting. Flat File Fridays was something where we looped in the interns, as Elise mentioned earlier, so that we could have other voices on screen and other people talking about what they're doing in the institution.
Yeah, similar to Mary, we had a huge uptick in our social media output. In my world and my crew, we would generally, before COVID, write maybe 4 to 6 a month. And then it went to about 2 to 3 per week. And, you know, engaging content, inform them about the objects, you know, photos, what have you. And one of my part-time staff came up with the hashtag Tasty Tuesdays. So we started pulling interesting recipes from our old recipe books from our various collections to give kind of a swath of the various foods that folks would cook here in Raleigh. And the one on the right is, or I should say in the middle is one of our posts from Black History Month, which is also a photograph featured in our Pope House second floor exhibit.
Next slide. And I'll just mention briefly, many of us are involved in AAM's MAP and accreditation programs as reviewers and in consultations. The Southeast has a lot of museums that are small and many are volunteer run, and they ask us for help. And this continued. And what we did is turn all of this virtual. We had Zoom interviews and meetings, pre-recorded virtual tours of collections, collection storage areas and exhibits. And in terms of NAGPRA, we've been doing consultations virtually using Zoom and telephone calls. In this case, we do not record the Zoom meetings for reasons of privacy and confidentiality as the tribes request. And that's it for programming.
Thank you so much, Elise. We have 2 questions in the Q&A section, so I'm just going to go through those one at a time. Looks like Liz is asking how large our collections committee is. Personally, at the Gregg, we only have staff on our collections committee. It's kind of an unusual circumstance, and we have 5 members.
As far as our committee, our collections committee here for the City of Raleigh's HRM program, it is through our advisory board, which is a 12-member body of the community. And the committee itself is 4 members. And I always have to have a quorum. So 3 or more have to attend Zoom or in person to get the votes. Staff abstain. I only present the slate of donations.
And for us in our organizational structure, and because of the size of our museum and the amount of specimens that we have, specimens and objects, we do not have formal collections committees. We have codified procedures for accepting donations and for deaccessions, which involve the collections manager, registrar in charge of the collection, and the curator in charge of the collection. We only involve the director if it's above a certain monetary amount. So we just had meetings, you know, I'd meet with the curator. We didn't have a lot of donations until recently. So
I might just jump in too as another, private nonprofit, but at the Gibbs Museum, the collections committee was about anywhere between 12 and 15, with about half being appointed from the board of directors, and the rest made up who were asked members of the community that were involved with the arts in some way. So just as a non-university, non-governmental aspect.
All right, a second question says, we concentrated more on online children's learning modules during the lockdown instead of online exhibits. Has anyone else gone this route instead? At the Gregg, no, we focused on college level and up and focused on those exhibitions and ways that we could do groups in that way. Ainsley or Elise, did you have any experience there?
The closest I think we go to that were our Sammy videos. So Raleigh is the city of the oaks, and squirrels love oak trees, and Sammy the squirrel is our little mascot. And he would bebop around in these probably 8 to 10 minute videos around our sites, and each video was a different topic. And that was primarily run by our education staff. There's an education person at each one of our sites. And if there was a collections need, for example, there was one about Latta Historic Park's history. So I pulled some objects connected to the archaeology at the site and sent them photographs for the video, similar about our Red Cross video. But I was never the person on camera. I would just send them the resources.
I know for us, we have a department of exhibits and education. So I don't know as much about this, but I do know that staff of that department did a lot of work. We have programs for people of all ages. We have school programs, and they did a lot of work to quickly translate existing programs and create new programs virtually. And they had some very successful programs, Ask a Scientist, field, they had graduate students talking about their field experiences, what was the most embarrassing thing they had done, what was the most successful. They had converted some of the school programs so that the teachers who were teaching virtually could use the modules in their classes.
Yeah, a lot of our living history stuff, to piggyback onto Evelyn's second part, the things that we would normally do on site, like hearth cooking or whatnot here, those were just not possible for spacing constraints and or safety due to just general city protocol regarding fire. And Elena, you are more than welcome to steal our Tasty Tuesdays. Yeah, I will tell my part-timer that came up with that, you know, it's going far and wide.
I know we're at time, but could I ask each of you just to respond to a question? Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'm just curious, is there a practice from pre-COVID times that you think will not come back, or something that you're leaving behind? That's a hard one.
I mean, going back to one of our first things, I don't know that we will go back to fully in-person collections committees. And I think that there are some classes and folks who will continue to interact virtually almost exclusively, whether it's through a program or class or whatever.
I hope, I don't know if this will happen because it's, you know, so many working parts to an exhibit. We were really forced to, instead of relying on technology, you know, your touch screens in an exhibit or that type of thing, to think in a non-touching world to get the information across. And I kind of liked it. It really forced us to put on our thinking caps and think in kind of, we'll call it a 1990s way about it, you know, versus the 2020 way.
I know for us, it's not just collections related, but our meetings, our staff meetings, we have a monthly all museum staff meeting. We have a monthly department meeting of the Department of Natural History and a monthly collections managers meeting. All of those went to Zoom, and we found two things. One, more people attended, and they were more successful. And so I believe that the director has decided and the department chair has decided to continue that format. We're scattered across campus. We have 2 buildings on campus. We have a lot of off-site facilities, and it just is much easier to meet virtually. And as Ainsley said, I think some of the virtual programs will remain. We had a lot of participation in our virtual classes that from all over the world. And so those were very successful in that respect. And so I think some of those will continue as well.
One other thing that I thought while you were speaking was about paperwork. I think that we will continue using shared drives, Google Drives, those kinds of things, because the ability to access that from wherever and to access it unexpectedly. You might not be able to plan to be at home that day. You can't carry home the files, but suddenly you're quarantined and you have to move forward from where you are. So that flexibility has become integral to how we work now.
Same for us too.
Thank you all. I know I threw that curveball in at the end. I just like seeing what people have to say.
I put up here just a little comment. I think we've all learned a lot in the last 17 months, and I just encourage you each to use what works and keep trying new things, because we're gonna face new challenges, whether they're pandemic level or pipe bursting level. This is a temporary wall that was in one of our exhibitions. So we drew a COVID molecule on it, and then we gave everybody on staff the opportunity to come and just smash it with a hammer. So humor and stress relief are also integral parts of any staff plan. I think there was a comment in the chat about further information. So I think Zinnia, you can address how this is available afterwards, but also here is our contact information. So if you have follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to us.
Absolutely. Thank you all. That was great. Again, it's so interesting just to hear the different departments of a museum and how they've managed to go forward and in some cases thrive even during very difficult circumstances with all of the newness that everyone's having to deal with day to day. In terms of this presentation, the recording will be available on the SEMC YouTube channel probably by the end of the week. I always do a little editing, usually of myself saying something silly at the beginning. And then I also put them on the SCMC website under the virtual program series. And as an aside, all of the virtual programs that we've done over the course of this year are available to watch either on the YouTube page or on the website. I will send a link to those recordings to everybody who registered. And if y'all are willing to share this PowerPoint, I think there was some interest in sharing that as well with those who went ahead and registered. So I really appreciate that. But thank you all. I know that doing these programs is additional work on top of all of the amazing work that you're already doing. And, you know, this was a really fun one for me. I always enjoy seeing all of you. And, you know, lots of really great information and takeaways, which is always the goal. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Zinnia, for having this program and allowing us to do this.
And just while I'm thinking about it, we're kind of actually staying on the collection side for the September virtual program, which will be September 21st at 11 a.m. Eastern. I don't have the information up yet because we just scheduled it. But there's a company called Conserve, which is out of Birmingham, Alabama. They are an environmental monitoring company. And so they're also a major sponsor of SCMC 2021, but the products and the information that they'll be providing are just some different ways for collections managers, registrars, people in operations to consider environmental monitoring kits and types of equipment going forward. So that information will be available as soon as I can get it all out there. But I'm looking forward to it, and thank you all again. Thank you to everybody who stuck around. I'm sorry we went a little bit over time, but I hope you think it was worth it. Have a great rest of your week, everyone. Bye.
Yes, thanks for attending.
Thanks, everyone.